How is everybody doing? And welcome back for another Strength Chat episode. Today, I have got a very special guest for you all. Today, I'm joined by a sports nutritionist and a five-time South African
Mm,
powerlifting champion. Today, I am
yeah.
joined by the one and only Pia Marangoni. How are you doing?
Hi, Steve. I'm good, thanks. And you? I mean, that's quite a yeah. I should keep you as a hype man. So,
I keep saying if I wasn't coaching, if I wasn't working in gyms, I think I'd love to be a commentator or an announcer. Yeah, I would. I think that would be good.
I, I mean, like stranger things have happened. So maybe you should put that out there, and I'll let the guys at the IPF know because I know they're always looking for people.
Absolutely. But how are you, Pia? What
Uh,
have you been up to? What's been happening in your world recently?
Good, thank you. I well, recently left my bank job of 20 years. I had started studying nutrition a couple of years back and then became far more interested in nutrition when I became serious about powerlifting and decided to do this full time. I am turning 45 this year. So, I mean, that might be a coincidence, doesn't matter. Um, but yes, so I've been really busy working to build my business and establish myself after, leaving the bank and just get into full time, coaching and lifting. I have this dream of lifting and drinking coffee and sleeping. So I'm working on getting that right, But yeah, and just working, I'm working with quite a few athletes now as we're going into Worlds in a few weeks' time. And yeah, I'm so excited to be having opportunities to discuss nutrition for powerlifters and the difference in the nuances between sports nutrition and well, performance nutrition and bodybuilding and so on. But Steve, sorry, but just before I always get so excited, I just wanted to let you know, and if it's okay with you, I've got a little download which you can send over to your listeners. I'm sure we're going to cover quite a lot of this stuff, so it's just a little summary um, of some tips to help them get stronger quicker. So if you just, I'll send over the link afterwards. And I just wanted to just kind of remind, I always forget to tell
Yeah,
people that
no
we've
worries at
done
all.
this
That'll be
little guide. So if
yeah.
that's okay, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
Add that into the episode notes. I think that'll be really useful, especially I always want people to take at least one thing away from the episode, a little bit of knowledge or information that they can use, but an actual sort of like practical takeaway. I think that'll be really cool. I think one question
Exactly.
from there, obviously, quite exciting, leaving your previous job to then, focus more on nutrition. How have you found that transition?
It's quite an adjustment. Um, I think it was, yeah, it's been brutal actually. um, Absolutely nothing has gone according to plan. But like I take a lot of my powerlifting has taught me a lot about resilience and how to adapt and literally just going, okay, well, this isn't planning out, we just need to pivot and keep going. But I find it really rewarding, and being able to help people where I struggled for so long personally is really exciting, and seeing how when people just make, I always say to people, like, you don't have to do a lot, you just need to do a little consistently, and seeing that consistency start to bear fruit is very exciting for me. And people are like, oh, this is working. I'm like, yes, it is. It's not hard. There's no, the industry likes to make us believe there's these secret protocols and these, like, it's really very simple. People generally people know what to do. They battle to implement, and they battle to build consistency. So helping people more navigate the behavior change side of nutrition is really rewarding. So that has been really fueling me and filling my cup, especially when I'm like, the payday comes and I'm like, oh, this there's no money in my bank account, you know. So that's that. I won't lie. That's been a huge adjustment, but it's, you know, it's, I feel like we're settling down now. So
Yeah. Oh,
yeah,
nice.
you know,
And I know
we've got to.
obviously you mentioned there about your previous job. Obviously, you know, your own competing in powerlifting, and then studying nutrition. But for everyone listening who might not know your background, how you got involved in powerlifting, how you then wanted to become a sports nutritionist. Just want to give a little bit of a background to yourself.
Yeah, sure. So around it's almost 10 years ago now, I was really, really overweight. And I had, you know, I still feel that very much it was like the pinnacle of my career. I was head of, you know, private bank marketing for one of the blue chip banks here. But I was really not eating very well. I was very overweight. I was smoking maybe 2 boxes of cigarettes a day. I couldn't lose weight. I went to a doctor. I was diagnosed as being pre-diabetic, and she said to me, "Well, you need to do something." And of course, I did. And she put me on some medication, and then I started doing CrossFit because that was, you know, anyway. So through CrossFit, I was exposed to the barbell, obviously, and it was love at first touch, I suppose. You know, and that was the really cool thing for me is that I couldn't run the 400 meters in the warm up, but I could very easily deadlift 60 kilos without like having done any strength training. So that's kind of what kept me going back to CrossFit is that I couldn't do everything, but I could just do this one little thing. And I felt that I was making progress. So that's kind of my introduction to the bar. And from there, I just wanted to just do powerlifting because I could. Have you ever seen a happy run? Sorry if any of you guys run, but and that's how I got introduced to powerlifting. Started working with my coach, you know, and through this actually decided that I kind of deep down always wanted to compete. I was looking at the numbers and going, well, I think I can do that, you know. And that's when I started getting very serious about nutrition for performance. But in between all of that, trying to improve my health, trying to lose weight, I had been to, you know, how it is. So many people tried so many diets and nothing would stick. So I decided, well, I don't know if I can trust anyone with information, so I'm going to go study this and figure it out for myself. So I did a course in nutrition through a company called Precision Nutrition. And during this time, I started working with Kristen, who is the founder of Fiercely Fueled, and started making really good progress both in lifting and improving body composition. And I found that you can eat in a way that is, you know, sustainable. I mean, it is hard work. I'm not going to say it isn't, but I was getting the results that I wanted. I was maintaining strength. And, you know, things were going really well. And one day in one of my check-ins, I was really frustrated. I said to her, you know, I must just maybe just do a career pivot and do this first full-time. And she said, well, you know, well, actually, if this is something you're interested in, I'm looking to expand and I'm looking for coaches. And as I'd been studying, I was like, yes, I want to help people with this because, you know, I feel there's so much noise. There's like that somebody just needs to be, and there are some really good, authentic voices out there, but I don't think there's enough. And I just felt the niche in lifting because I see so many, not only women, but specifically women enter into these really destructive cycles of diets, compete, like their weight goes up, you know, like a kind of a binge and restrict cycle, which is normalized because we're competing. And, you know, it's either that or we're doing drastic weight cuts to make weight for a meet. Now, again, I'm not saying there isn't a time and place for a little bit of dieting or weight cutting. There definitely may be, but it's too prevalent, you know. And I think if you're competing 3 or 4 times a year and you're dieting down 5 kilos every time you need to make weight for a meet, you're not only doing, you know, maybe behaving in a way that's not healthy, but you're also shortchanging yourself on any gains. So that's where I've become, like, I feel that we've really found a niche and I'm really passionate about it. So that's a long answer to a short question.
No, thanks for that. I think from there, I think one thing that you mentioned, obviously, that, you know, there is a lot of voices out there, but I think it's sometimes filtering those voices. Literally, when you mentioned there about, you know, there's so much information out there and, you know, what people should be doing. I had a conversation with, she's relatively never been to the gym before, came in, She's just, she isn't looking to compete in powerlifting or anything like that. She just wanted to generally lose a little bit of weight. And she actually mentioned to me that she was doing a something 800 diet, which was going to be like 800 calories a day. And I just went, please, please, please don't do that. I actually thought about what I'd ate that day. And because I had a little bit of a longer day, I always try and have a bigger breakfast. And I was thinking my breakfast was around about 600
Yeah.
calories. So I was like, that's gonna fill me up from there. So if someone's only eating 800, that'd have completely wiped it out. So I
Mm.
do think, trying to filter out that information and put the right information out there, or more helpful information, because I think it can be, from speaking with members and clients that I've worked with, it can be overwhelming. It can be a little bit too
Definitely.
much. And I think touching on that
Definitely.
as sort of when we've been talking about, focusing on the powerlifting side of things and the strength side of things, we talk a lot about fueling performance, but what does that actually mean? What's that? What should people be looking for? Because you
Mm.
can use that phrase, but I think there's going to be a couple of layers to that.
Absolutely right. Just to touch on just to go back to your clients is, the distressing thing is there's so many people that think 800, 1,000, 1,200 calories a day is a reasonable amount of food for an adult woman. But anyway, so I mean, these are the things people ask. I have a client who's competing now in a few weeks' time, and she said to me, I'm really battling to eat carbs because, like, I mean, we know carbs have got this bad rep, but she said the amount of food that I'm eating is terrifying. But on the other hand, my deadlift is doing this. So it's like once they start to see the connection between, oh, I'm eating, but I'm performing, then it kind of settles down. But it's a lot of work that we have to overcome. It's a lot of social conditioning. And like, society is exposed to this from the time we're born, so you have to be very intentional about challenging your thoughts around nutrition. Like I said, to people, why don't you have a chicken salad for breakfast? And they'll say, well, that's not a breakfast. And I'm like, who says? Who
Yeah.
says you can't have chicken salad for breakfast? We can have whatever we want. You don't have to have bacon and eggs. We don't have to have I mean, you can. But anyway, so that's, let me just get back onto the topic of fueling for training. But again, if I want to circle back to when I started out, I actually had gone to a bodybuilder when I wanted to lose weight for powerlifting, because I mean, bodybuilders have incredible physiques, they move weights, they are looking muscular. And this is kind of what triggered my excitement about speaking to you. Is you were speaking to, I think, Steve Tripp about, yeah, his like how he's evolved from bodybuilding to
Mm-hmm.
powerlifting. But it's like the approach is very different. Bodybuilders are really training for aesthetics, like for all intents and purposes, and I don't mean this in an insulting way. They don't have much of a performance aspect to when they get on the stage. I know that flexing, like, their posing is actually quite intense, but they don't have to perform in the way that powerlifters have to perform. So that's a very different approach. And as a lifter, we want to give you as much food as we possibly can, as many nutrients as we can, for the job at hand, not as little. So these are like two fundamental differences. But going back to how can we dial in on our training nutrition? What does it mean to train fueled? Is exactly what it says, but like we need to eat. How many lifters wake up first thing in the morning and train fasted? I would say quite a lot. If you're training 5 a.m., the last thing you want to do is wake up 2 hours before and eat. I mean, I wouldn't advocate that, but we spend so much time in the gym. Like for me, going to training is the easy part in a way. It's what you do the other 23, 24, however long you train, 22 hours of the day, that's actually going to bear fruit from that training. So if you're training, you're killing yourself for 2 hours and then you're leaving and you're not eating and then you're having, fast food, you're not eating vegetables, you're not sleeping, you're not drinking any water, you're really just kind of spinning your wheels. So if you want to get stronger faster, the first thing we can do is start by how do we help you train with a little bit of fuel. So And this is where, for powerlifting specifically, things get really interesting because as lifters, we need, I mean, like there's a lot of nutrition for endurance athletes and runners around fueling for them. Not so much for us, but it's starting to come. There's a couple of things that we need to kind of dial in on. Is we want to keep fat away from training. So we need it to be healthy, but fat slows your digestion down. So if you're eating a peanut butter sandwich before your training, there's absolutely nothing wrong with a peanut butter sandwich. Your body's not necessarily using that energy from that food in your training session because of the length of time it takes to digest that fat. Okay, so that's the one thing. Fiber is the same. People often will have fruits, raspberries or bananas or whatever before training. And fruit is great. We love fruit. But again, there's lots of fiber in fruit. And due to the way your body breaks down fructose, it's going to take longer for that energy to be available to you than if you didn't have fiber. So getting in some quick digesting carbohydrates before your session, that is the secret to everything. So I'm sure you've seen lots of powerlifters like grazing on like Sour Patch Kids or wine gum. That there's a reason for that. So the thinking is you want to give your body readily available energy for your session. So quick digesting carbohydrates, so that is carbohydrates that are ranked very high on the glycemic index score. We want to get to as close to like glucose as possible, because that means your body can access that within a few minutes of eating it, and you can actually fuel your session. If you have fuel for your session, you have better training sessions, and if you have better training sessions, you can do more. So that's the one thing. So if you're, let's say, for example, a 5 a.m. training person, we would want you to have something to eat before your training. Now, if you're training in the evening, you could have a lunch, and we'll talk about how to dial that in. But, the best thing you can do for yourself early morning is you don't necessarily have to get up and eat something, but you could build a shake with something like a dextrose and a protein, which you could sip on during your warm-up, and that will make a world of difference to your training.
Yeah.
It sounds silly. And if you can eat, that's even better. But that's a game changer, both to your ability to train harder and your ability to recover quicker. So the first part of it is training your session, and the second part of it is fueling after your session. So both of them, they kind of sound very similar. We want quick digesting carbs in and around your training. And what most people miss out when they finish training is like a lot of people will have a protein shake or some form of protein, but you need carbohydrates also. So protein is for the muscle protein synthesis, but you also need energy to repair and rebuild and deal with inflammation. So we recommend a 3-to-1 carbohydrate to protein ratio. So if you're having 20 grams of protein, we would recommend 60 grams of carbohydrates straight after your training. And that's it. It's really simple. And then for the rest of the time, we want you to obviously get in lots of protein and veggies and whole foods. But that's really the magic formula right there.
Yeah, I think from that, what you've touched on there, it doesn't that doesn't sound like anything crazy difficult or anything but for a lot of lifters, they're going to base their training. I mean, in an ideal world, you'd be able to train, at the optimal times and those sorts of things. But I think for a lot of people, obviously, it is an amateur sport. Everyone will be, working 9 to 5 or working shifts or whatever it may be. And it's kind of, they might train on the same days, but that time might change when life gets in the way, like training first thing on a morning, training, later on in the night. I think as well, from what you mentioned there, especially, when you've gone to a bodybuilder, they're looking good shape, but, there's got to be that performance element to it. When we're talking about, being specific for powerlifters, do you think that's sometimes a common mistake where people are looking at other people's diets? So say, for example, I've had a lot of clients look at like CrossFit, people who are doing CrossFit, but obviously the demands of that sport is going to be a lot different to the powerlifting side of things. So what's the difference between, actually focusing for powerlifting compared to bodybuilding, CrossFit,
Mm.
and other sports?
I mean, that's a good question. And for me, it's not a straightforward answer because of the fact that we're coaching real people in real lives and not professional athletes. And I mean, I might even extend this to professional athletes. So, it's all about, we know there's the example of if you're a mom of two young children, we can't expect you to have the same bandwidth, if you want to call it, as a youngster living at home with his parents and his mom's cooking. So it needs to be highly individualized according to the individual. But um, you know, again, I would also say, the bodybuilding, they also need to navigate their lives and the demands of their stress and time. But it's all about how much energy you use and what activity you're doing and how you feel that activity. So, I would say maybe, someone who's doing like recreational CrossFit, probably doesn't need the same amount of energy as a powerlifter. It's probably more metabolic work. They're probably training different energy systems. They're not doing as much barbell work. But they would still benefit from this kind of protocol. It's not to say that it wouldn't benefit. Training fueled is always beneficial. As a matter of fact, we've just had the regionals here, and or the semifinals, I think. And I've just said there's a few guys that I know, and we've just given them a few tips, and they're all like, "Oh, wow, I feel so much better." So, again, the principles of having readily available energy for whatever your task is at hand will apply both to endurance sports, CrossFit, barbell sports. Where we don't want to have quick digesting energy is if sitting at your computer all day. You don't need that energy. Your body is just going to suck it out of your bloodstream and go and store it. That's kind of what we want to avoid. More importantly, though, is that how do we manage the recovery? So if you're doing, I'll use the word cardio very loosely. Like, if you're doing cardio work, like kind of when you stop running, the demand in your body stops. But for strength training, there are metabolic demands on your body for up to 48 hours after your training system. So, that process of muscle repair is actually quite taxing on the body. So, we need to fuel that, and not only just fuel your session, but make sure that you're getting in enough food every day throughout your training cycle to optimize that. So I would say maybe that's just more the difference is how the stimulus is impacting the person and how that person is recovering within the context of their own life, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So with that, because I know obviously there's going to be that train of thought of, okay, well, I need to make sure that I eat something before training. I need to get something a little bit afterwards. But within that training window, if you're training for an hour, 2 hours, you've still got, like what you mentioned at the start, there's going to be the X amount of hours that you've got left during the day. But then also in terms of, if the recovery is going to take maybe up to 48 hours after a session, all of a sudden, then that it's not just a case of in and around training, it's, a lot longer, looking at that weeks into months, and it's going to take a little more planning. I always think that, the nutrition side of things, if you're planning a 12-week block or whatever it might be of training, the nutrition side of things has to match that as well, rather than sometimes just going day to day. How can lifters kind of try and optimize everything around that? What would be your tips or common mistakes that you see that lifters struggle with?
Most people do not sleep nearly enough. That is, if we're talking about recovery, I use the word nutrition, fiercely fueled. The name is about being fueled, but we coach so much more than just macros and so much more than eat this amount of protein and so on. I agree with you. If you're a competitive lifter or if you're serious about lifting, I am like, well, I have a strategy. I'm going to be world champion. My strategy though is just to live longer than everyone else. Okay. So, I mean, I'm in it for the long haul. And if you really will be doing yourself a huge favor by having a bigger approach like a longer term approach to nutrition and recovery than just the 12-week cycle, right? So yes, dialing in and you're making sure that you've got your training sessions dialed in as much as possible. We know life happens, and a few days here and there, it's not really going to do too much damage. It's what you do consistently over time. So I see people like absolutely killing themselves in the gym, working so hard, and then sleeping for 6 hours, and then wondering why they're not, getting any, making any progress. But sleep is possibly the biggest performance enhancing strategy you can have, and most people do not sleep nearly enough. So excuse me, if we can just get you sleeping a little but more, if you're not sleeping in the region of 7 to 8 hours, that is something to aim for, because unless your sleep is kind of in range, you're eating predominantly whole foods, kind of, and supporting your training, like everything else becomes ineffective. People will say to me, what supplement do I need to take? Well, nothing until you get your sleep dialed in and you're drinking water. And that's another thing, is hydration. Really important. And coffee, cola, Monster does not count towards water. Sorry, powerlifters.
With the sleep side of things, because I know from and I've spoken to this about with coaches as well. That's kind of the because people will say, "Oh, we just need to. It's the grind. Yeah, I need to get up and all those sorts of things." Whereas actually, it's that thing. Oh, well, no, actually going to bed a little bit earlier. So that you're feeling well rested. It's not just a case of like banging your head against a brick wall and expecting that it'll just happen. Is where lack of sleep, where that is going to influence poor food choices, or where there might be or overeating a little bit, or not making the decisions or thinking about it because sleep is impacting their decision making around food, if that kind of makes sense.
It could absolutely. When people say to me they don't want to sleep, I say, well, Michael Jordan sleeps over 12 hours a day. I mean, but okay, that's not potentially feasible for most of us. It would be nice, but again, it's like we this rise and grind mentality. It's a difficult one, because yes, we need to have a work ethic. You need to hold yourself accountable. You need to show up even when you don't feel like it. All of those things, but also, none of us are professional athletes. Let's not be stupid about it. And at some point, there's a threshold that there's a threshold of diminishing returns, and often people don't know what it feels like to be well rested and well nourished, because they've never done it. And when I started working with Kristen and I bumped my feet up, I was like, whoa, this feels amazing. It really does. So sometimes we don't know how it feels and how it should feel. But going back, I like to say to guys, well, you want to talk about motivation and discipline. Well, it's easy to get to gym, but it's discipline to put your phone down and stop scrolling through Insta 30 minutes before bedtime. Now, that's the kind of discipline that we need to kind of be challenging here, But back to your question, is we know, and there's a lot of studies out there that show poor sleep impacts your decision making. You do make worse decisions. As a matter of fact, if you'll die if you don't sleep for 3 or 4 days. You will eventually die. I forget how long, but sleep deprivation is a form of torture. We know that. It's like you start behaving like you're drunk, and it definitely impacts your decision making. But it could even be something as simple as you're awake longer, so now you've got a longer window to eat. So it could be something as basic as that, or it could start impacting things like your body's ability to deal with stress. Your cortisol will stay higher. It messes with your insulin, so your hunger cues. All of these things start getting out of whack. When you look, like if you have 1 or 2 nights, if your baby keeps you awake. Let's also just take, if you're a new parent. This does not count for you, okay? So you can just kind of just go, okay, these first couple of months with the baby, these rules don't apply, because you are not your own person, and you just don't worry about your sleep. It'll sort itself out. But for everybody else, a few hours here or there. We have a few poor nights. It is what it is. It happens to the best of us. Alcohol is another thing that can impact sleep. Now, not saying never drink, but we know that if we have a few drinks, you don't get deep sleep. You don't get I think, REM sleep. You don't get that deep restorative sleep. So you'll be, apart from being dehydrated, you're going to feel a bit crappy the next day, and it will definitely impact your recovery and your training, and that's fine as long as you make an informed decision about it. You can't expect to perform at the highest level if you go on a bender every Friday night.
Yeah, absolutely, because I think a couple of things that you've mentioned there are all it's never to say you can't do this or you can't do that. It's just a case of realizing the impact that it will or can have on performance, because especially if people are training 3-4 times a week, and how that's going to impact their recovery. It's going to have a knock-on effect for the next session. So in terms of going from session to session and making sure that we're recovered for the next session, what's kind of what's kind of like the best practice for that? What's kind of your approach in terms of structuring once when they're training, when the lifter's training, structuring their nutrition around that to make sure that they are recovered, sort of like the key factors for recovery, but then also making sure they're ready for the next session.
So we look at things such as, how did the quality of your training go? So when I coach athletes, we've got a number of metrics that they track. So one of them is, how did you feel? How did the session feel? Because I'm sure you've got to the bar and you're like, it's really heavy, and that happens. I mean, that's part of it. But, if you're really struggling through a session, if you're really white knuckling it through a session, that's an indication that something is off. Your soreness in response to that training. So how sore did you feel the next day and the day after? Now, what we do see is the moment you start getting that post-training kind of little carb, that little protein and carb meal in, we see a dramatic drop in soreness. So it does definitely help, the way you feel. But we also look at things such as heart rate variability. So how is your body responding to stress? And so, heart HRV is not it's very individual. So sometimes we have to look at, a trend over time. But, like I can see if if your HRV is high and then it starts to tank, something is going on. And if you haven't had a drink and you haven't had like some weird curry that's giving you a stomach upset, there is something going on. So sometimes that can be a good indication of you're getting sick or you're under recovering. And then sleep is another thing. So how long you're sleeping and how well you're sleeping. So these are the things that we track for our athletes. Not everybody has to track everything. Again, it's fit for purpose. So there's also a caveat of, it depends on what do you want from lifting, why are you lifting, and what your goals are. But the guys that come to me are quite intent on growing their strength, and these things are really important. So if we see that you're at one stage, I very, very reluctantly took my training down from 4 times a week to 3. It was like because I just wasn't recovering, and my ego was more bruised than anything. But I just last year, when I was tying things up and trying to get stuff sorted for the new company, it was really stressful. And life stress, stress is stress. So what we see happening is, when you get stressed, it doesn't matter where that stress is coming from, it can impact your sleep. So I was kind of waking up in the middle of the night because we have these cortisol spikes. I wasn't managing that properly. And we just said, listen, it's just better just to kind of pull back for now. And then we can ramp up again. Which reminds me, I forgot one other thing is, I work quite a lot with my athletes on improving their stress management techniques. Mm-hmm. So, we're living in a pretty stressful time. A lot of our stress is pretty much out of our control, if it's career related or you're stuck in traffic or, political, environmental things, and we can't always control them, but we can still do things to help manage our body's ability to deal with stress. So we work quite a lot with the athletes on like helping them learn how to meditate. And I used to think meditation was like kind of woo-woo. And I listened to a podcast with I think his name's Andrew Puddycombe. I think he started Headspace, and he was working with NFL football players. And I was like, oh, okay, there's something in this. And then I started digging into that. So meditation, mindfulness, breathing, journaling, anything not powerlifting related, to help tamp down that fight or flight stress response is incredibly helpful and very powerful as well. So I mean, there's a lot of facets to recovery that go beyond just what you eat.
Yeah. And with that as well, the last thing obviously said there, beyond, just what you eat. And I know, we've spoken about, the food that we need to fuel our performance. But when we look at performance, there's a lot of things that encompasses that, how our sleep is, how our stress is. From your experience and the athletes and the clients that you've worked with, do you think that sometimes, because we know that training is probably the easiest part, because you actually have to go to the gym to train, and you can focus on that for the hour and a bit that you're training. It's not like that with nutrition or with stress, because it's all the time. It's there all the time. There's not a designated place where everyone can just be like, right, I want to eat for an hour and then I want to go and do work for an hour and then want to do this. It's not as structured as that. Whereas the gym, like I say, is a place that you go from there. Do you find that the next thing that people can start progressing with is the nutrition, and then the final part to actually see an increase in performance or strength or whatever it may be is, fine tuning the sleep side of things, the stress side of things, the recovery side of things?
I think, I will say this. I mean, I would say that nutrition and sleep are just as important. So it's a case of like, if X, then Y. If you're sleeping 4 hours a day, I don't, dialing in on nutrition is going to be helpful, but it won't be as helpful as improving your sleep. So, I think we need to, again, like look at, how the person is in their life. But definitely, if you're sleeping reasonably well, nutrition is a game changer. Absolutely. If you do nothing else but just support your pre and post training, that will make a huge difference. So if we want to rank kind of like the order of the hierarchy of like bang for buck, the low hanging fruits and the quick wins. Okay, so making sure that you're sleeping and making sure that you have dialed in your pre and post training. That's the little guide that I'm going to send you. It's actually broken down a lot more coherently. I'll just show you, with some percentages and guidelines and examples and things like that. But I have clients that some of them work in hospitals and they've got to scrub in and they're on 12-hour shifts, so they can't eat during the day, and they train very early mornings. So we just want to make sure that like we kind of lock that in, and then the rest of the time we manage as best as we can, because again, there's what the science says and what the recommendations are, and then there's coaching real people in real lives, and they are very different things. So if we can't evolve this to as close to the person's life as, then we're not helping people. So back to your question, sleep, pre and post training, nutrition, overall nutrition, sleep, and then we can start fine tuning all the little other bits and pieces. But I find it's never like there's always one big opportunity with people, like, oh, this is the quick one. I can really see the impact that we can make. So there are things that we can do that make big impacts. But then, as your life changes over time, like it's kind of, it like moves, it's very dynamic. So maybe you'll start a new job, or you'll, want to change a weight class, or there's a baby, and so things are very dynamic as well. So it's not a straightforward answer, I'm afraid.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's that thing though. I know, that phrase of it depends is used quite a lot. However, it's kind of because I think you always need to, or try and give a definitive answer, but because things are moving so much, there might be a period of time, whereas right now, in this period of time, you can get more sleep. More sleep is going to be more beneficial. However, if you all of a sudden start working shifts or have a kid or anything like that, right? So sleep now is going to be impacted. So what's going to be better to put your efforts into, right? Well, the food side of things, because
Definitely.
I think
Definitely.
sometimes, especially for powerlifters, they control the numbers and can see things, and you can use that data a little bit. Whereas when things kind of get out of your control a little bit, that's where it's like you can put efforts into the wrong
Yes.
things. So if you're just you touched on it before, if you're just spinning your wheels, it's something that isn't making you better, right? Then look at the other low hanging fruit, because all of those things are you don't have to do all of them, but if you put efforts into certain things or one or two of them, all of a sudden that's going to change from there. I think
Mm.
one thing as well, which is kind of probably more of a myth busting, if you like, or anything like that. There's that train of thought that as soon as you finish training, you need to be eating straight away, because if you don't eat outside this certain window, then everything's going to be lost. What's kind of when we're talking about eating around training, is there actual time frames where you need to be getting food in at certain points, or is it just a case of, right, this is what we need to be, this is a general guideline of what we need to be focusing on?
Mm. It's a very good question. And again, there's a lot of conflicting science around that. So what I will say though is I'm not going to go into the various bits and pieces, and I remember having this kind of debate with my coach. And he said, well, you don't need all of these carbs during your training. You're not going to deplete your glycogen stores. And I'm like, okay, so and just for those of you who don't know, when you eat carbohydrates, it gets broken down into glucose. If you have too much glucose in your bloodstream, your body kind of stacks them almost like Lego blocks and stores them in your liver and your muscles until you need them. And as a power lifter, you will never, well, you should never like deplete your body's store of glycogen, because your body is very clever. It can store energy in the form of fat and glycogen, and you can use it at a later date. And I was like, yeah, he's right, So I spoke to Kristen about this, and she said, no, you won't. But we want to optimize. So our whole strategy is, let's try and make a most out of the time in the gym. If you don't eat within 30 minutes of training, no one's going to come and beat you. You're not going to you're not going to your muscles aren't going to eat each other. You're not going to undermine anything. But if you do, you could just get a little bit further. So it's about optimal versus sufficient, if that makes sense to you. I like to tell people, I mean, it's all in this guideline, so let me read my own notes. That within 30 minutes of training, before or intra training, that's the beginning of your training. That's when you want to get your quick digesting carbs in. Again, it relates to how your body accesses energy from the glucose. It's quick digesting, it's going to be available in your bloodstream pretty quickly, and you need to be able to use it pretty quickly. So that's why we like it. Again, post training, the window is, let me not pick that up. It's in here. It's not written in this guide, but it is within 60 minutes, if I remember correctly. I like to do it literally as I'm putting my weights away. I like to make a shake with protein and dextrose, because then it's done and it's easy, and then you can eat. But if you don't eat like within 30 minutes post training, and you eat 2 hours later, the biggest and most important thing is that you're eating enough food on a daily basis. That's kind of like, if that's, you need to be eating enough to grow strength. But if you want to just get that little bit of extra, that's how we would say you should do it.
Yeah, I think that's a good phrase that you use there. Looking for what's optimal and what's sufficient. Because I think we've spoken a lot there about other variables that can impact people's performance, and it probably is sufficient enough. Do you actually think that a lot more people actually undereat than they do actually overeat or eating enough? If that makes sense.
Mm. I find women generally tend to undereat, and men tend to eat more protein than they need,
Right.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
We work out how much protein an athlete should, and again, this word optimal. What would be an optimal level of protein for a particular athlete is based on the athlete's age. So older people need higher protein per pound of body mass because per body mass. I'm sorry, I'm trying to convert it to pounds, and my brain is glitching. I'm just talking kilos. So per kilo of body mass. The younger people, because your digestion is a little less efficient than when you're younger, and leaner people need more protein than kind of less lean people. If we have two lifters and they both weigh 100 kilos and one is 20% body fat and one is 30% body fat, you need to support that 80% lean mass with more protein because there's more metabolically active tissue. And this is often where people, I won't say they're wrong, again, it's optimal, but if you're overeating your protein, if you want to call it that, if you're eating more than you need, you're shortchanging your recovery because you're now taking calories which we could allocate to carbohydrates because we love carbohydrates, which may be more beneficial to you in terms of your recovery than muscle. So I see that a lot of men will, kind of like, okay, I weigh this, I'm just going to times it by 2 or 2.5, but they're not taking into account age and body composition. So that, again, it's not a straightforward answer.
Yeah. No, I think that's I think that's true, because it's kind of that thing of like what we touched on right at the beginning, when there's lots of information, and I think there is that train of thought of more is going to be always better. So protein is good, so more protein must be better. Whereas actually, it's that, like what you said there, you're going to have a set amount of calories that you're going to be able to use. You could say that, right, well, this is what I actually need, because especially, depending on what part of the season that you're in, if you're competing for prepping for a competition, or if you're in off season, it's not like for bodybuilding where more muscle is going to be better, because the bigger you are, the better it is. Whereas for strength sports, for the powerlifting side of things, you're going to have a certain amount of muscle mass, unless you're wanting to change your body composition or go up a weight class or anything like that. It's more of the training side of things. We just want to move that weight more efficiently so we can lift a little bit more weight, as opposed to putting more muscle on. Because if we put more muscle on, put more weight on, that's going to change the biomechanics of our lifts and those sorts of things.
Exactly.
Is that kind of your approach and how you communicate that with your athletes and clients?
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, again, it depends on what they want also, right? Some people want to go up a weight class. Some people want to go down a weight class. But, definitely I've experienced it myself. And we've actually just done a podcast episode with Meg Scanlon on, how going up a weight class, which is something women hardly ever do. And men like to go up. But it's also about what you want and how we're going to get there. There isn't necessarily a straightforward answer, because men, well, people who want to go up, they want to go up really quickly, and I'm like, well, it's not particularly helpful. I don't think it is if you just have a free for all and you just bulk. You want to bulk in a way that is supporting your goals. So we want to make sure that you you build muscle, and there will be a component of fat gain, but we want to keep it in alignment with how quickly you're building muscle. So I think again, there's caveats to everything.
It's just making sure was you listed there, age, experience, and what people's goals are. Throughout the chat we mentioned about, right, are you wanting to progress in powerlifting? Are you wanting to go from regionals to competing at the nationals, or whatever it may be? Because I think everything can be tailored and dialed in a little bit more. Whereas I think, for the majority of people, why potentially they, stop enjoying training or anything like that is because it's feeling hard, the feeling sore, the feeling as though they're not getting the most out of it. Whereas actually, the low hanging fruit there in terms of the sleep and the other protocols that we've chatted about can be helpful. And then all of a sudden from there, it might be like, oh, actually, I'm feeling good. I want to push on a little bit more. I want to do this. Quite a lot of topics and tangents thrown in there. But the last question that I like to ask from everything that we've chatted about there is, for everyone listening, what would be your take home points or words of wisdom?
I would say, well, you know what? Like, know your why. Okay, that's, I think, the most important thing is not everyone has to do all of these things. It really depends on why you live. Now, if you're looking to compete at a national, international level, we need to do things a little bit differently. If you're a recreational lifter and you want to be able to pick up your kids and bend over without hurting yourself. So I think it's important to start with why and know why you're doing this, and then make sure you eat your food and get your sleep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think, like I say, I think there's some practical takeaways from there. A phrase that gets stuck in my head quite a lot is, you can do the basics, but I think sometimes you can do the basics better, which is, what we
Absolutely.
touched on today.
Absolutely. I mean, and that goes right back to what we said in the beginning. It's about being able to be consistent. If you don't need fancy things, like, you don't need fancy protocols. What you need is the ability to implement things in your life consistently, because we know strength is a long game. And that's why it does. It gets hard. I think there's like a threshold at around 2 years where all the newbie gains are stopping. And that's where I feel it separates the mice from the men, because it gets really hard. But you need to be consistent, persistent. Can I just leave you with one little something that's been very like motivational to me? In James Clear's book, he talks about this thing called the plateau of latent potential. Is that you never know where that breakthrough position is going to be until you've gone through it. So often people stop just before they're making the breakthrough. And he uses this example as, if you take some ice out of a freezer and the room is the same temperature as the freezer, the ice won't melt. Even if you change the temperature of the room by 1 degree, the ice still may not melt. But eventually, these tiny 1 degrees, you'll have like one little trickle of water. And before you know it, there's a puddle of ice. That's powerlifting. And that's that 1 degree, that getting your training, nutrition in, getting your overall nutrition in, getting your sleep. Those are all the little 1 degrees that we're looking for. That's actually going to give us the breakthrough that we're looking. It's not ever one thing. It's often accumulation of many tiny things consistently over time.
Absolutely, I think that's a really good good point, because one thing that because we're in we can get everything immediately. We can get everything whenever we need, whether it's takeaways, whether it's ordering clothes offline. We can go. Whereas with strength, it builds up. It builds up over time, and I think one of the most undervalued things is patience. It's just that he's gonna take time. There's not going to be one thing going to happen like what you say and have an immediate change. It's an accumulation of all those things. Thanks a lot, Pia, for taking the time.
Thank you. Oh no, thank you so much for chatting to me. I really appreciate it.
No worries at all. If anyone has any questions about what we've chatted about today, see the content and information that you put out there, or even work with yourself, where can people reach out to you and find you?
Okay, thank you. You can find us on Instagram at Fiercely Fueled Nutrition, or I'm on Instagram as Pia Marangoni.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot for chatting today. I think there'll be some really good points to take out of there. Really looking forward to sharing the document as well. I think that'll be really useful for a lot of people. It will be useful for me as well to have a look. But no, thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on. Thanks a lot to everyone listening, and I will see you all next week.